Welcome back to Stat7 Sports. I'm Contain Kunas, and we are finally done with all the draft talk, all the AFC draft, NFC draft talk. Now, what comes next for some of our favorite teams, some of the local hometown guys, and that's what we're going through on this one, where we're going through what's next for the New Orleans Saints. I would go over a few others, but as this is Louisiana, where I'm from, let's just go with the Saints, and I'll go over the hometown LSU Tigers in a separate video. Just kind of the big transition after they had 14 players drafted and 6 other players as undrafted free agents. So what happens after that? But that's kind of the same way on this post-draft. Now we have the whole offensive line situation, as the Saints got a first-round pick in Cesar Ruiz, and at this point, the whole offensive line should be set, where Ruiz goes in for the McCoy position at center, even though both Ruiz and McCoy are both guard center combinations, and McCoy will just naturally go to that right guard position because they paid Pete for a 5-year deal this offseason. Now, what does that mean for the one that I left out, Larry Warford? So Warford is in the final year of his contract, so they were going to need to get a right guard replacement kind of regardless, at least someone to end up working to potentially replace him next season if they decide not to bring him back. For the fact that they brought in a rookie in the first round that could take away one of his positions, and McCoy being shifted over to his actual position shows that the Saints are very willing to find a way to move on from him. There has been speculation that the Saints have been trying to get in talks with the Seahawks, who have interest in signing Warford, in trading for Warford, potentially for a draft pick in next year's draft. You could have potentially seen this in this year's draft, but if you get something in next year's draft, that's all good in that case. So the main reason I'm trying to get rid of him at this point, besides the fact that he's in his last year and trying to get something out of him before he becomes a free agent, he's a $13 million cap hit for this year if he stays on the roster. So that's one of the higher hits on the entire team, besides outside of Breeze, amongst a few others. Breeze, Thomas, and a few others. But if you end up either cutting him or trading him to another team, well, if you cut him, he becomes a $5 million hit in cap money, to where that becomes dead cap for the Saints, to where they're going to take $5 million regardless of where he would go once he gets cut. But if he would get traded, some of that cap money would end up going to what the Seahawks have to deal with. So a lot of that, they're still going to get stuck with the $5 million, but the other $8 million of that $13 million cap hit would go to the Seahawks or any other team that would end up trying to get him. So there's benefit to the Saints trying to find a new home for Larry Warford, and amongst a few others. So one of the things that end up being a big reason on why they're trying to get rid of Warford, amongst others, is what they did with the offseason quarterback competition that they've done. So at the matter of the start of free agency, there were no Saints quarterbacks on the roster. Every single Saints quarterback was a free agent at the time. So at that point, you sign Breeze to a 2-year extension, which, with how the contract goes out, it essentially is kind of a 1-year, $23 million deal, which most people are thinking he's likely going to retire after this and go into a broadcaster job after it. But yeah, $23 million, and then the cap kind of goes on for the next couple years. That gave the Saints room this offseason to be able to go after Taysom Hill, which they gave him a sizable contract to potentially be the quarterback of the future at 31 years old once Breeze retires, if it be this year or next year. Most people assume it's one of them, but most people do assume that it's going to be after the 2020 season. So for but Mickey Lewis and Sean Payton and a lot of the Saints front office were thinking that they wanted to get a backup quarterback so they could get Taysom Hill to do a lot of his wildcat, a lot of his all-around offensive skill set to basically continue for the 2020 season without leaving an injury risk for Breeze's backup if something would happen to Breeze like it happened last year and Bridgewater took over. So they signed Jameis Winston, which I understand people's hesitation on this for the fact that he's kind of a head case to deal with off the field, and also for the fact that he threw 30 interceptions and really has been one that's given away a lot of possessions while he was on Tampa Bay. But for the fact that he's becoming a very low risk option to where he set himself up to where he's only going to be $1.1 million against the cap for a backup quarterback. He's making less money than two quarterbacks behind, than the Saints 2018 quarterback Chase Daniel. Because Chase Daniel is getting $10 million for a 3-year deal with the Lions, and he's still getting less money in a year than, let me just list off a few names: Nathan Peterman, Marcus Mariota, as he will be in constant comparison with Chad Henne, Matt Moore. I could go on, but pretty much the majority of the backup quarterbacks could give claim to having a higher pay grade than Jameis Winston this season. And then they end up drafting Tommy Stevens in the 7th round. They trade back in, give up a 6th round pick for next season to potentially get a Taysom Hill replacement, just in case they don't think Taysom's going to be the quarterback of the future, or if they still wanted someone to play that role for 2021 and further on. Because Hill really could leave after the 2020 season and Saints really be left with nothing. That's why you have potential on Jameis, which I prefer not to be a long-term deal, for him to be a long-term solution, but it is what it is after the Breeze situation, after Breeze retires. But outside of Jameis or Taysom, you can always have Tommy Stevens as just kind of a split guy for doing all the things that Taysom did for the past few years, and it does give them options just in case anything happens to Taysom, or if anything happens to some of their other backups with Winston or anyone else. And it does make it to where he'll be a cheap option for the future. As if you remember, the Packers initially drafted Taysom Hill with a 5th round pick whenever he was drafted, and they didn't keep him on his roster, so Tommy Stevens is being set up as even less of a pay grade than Taysom was whenever he was initially drafted, and it could potentially end up being kind of another steal just to find another Taysom, even though a lot of his skill set would not be on the same level as Taysom. But going on to the other draft picks that the Saints got, the undrafted gems that we got, as the Saints have been very keen on being able to get some of these undrafted guys, some of the guys that people kind of threw away and didn't want to deal with, not expecting them to do too much. Take Shai Tuttle, defensive tackle, last year at Tennessee. He's still in the active roster, and he played a significant number of snaps at D-tackle as one of the backups and has got himself into that rotation. So this year, with the 13 undrafted free agents that we signed, sorry, Adrian McGee, you're not included on this. I know LSU fans want to see an LSU guy that's not just Will Clapp on the roster, and I'm not sure if Will Clapp's going to still be in the roster after this. But Starting off with a former Madison Prep High defensive tackle that went to Texas out of Baton Rouge, Malcolm Roach, who a lot of people were really surprised that he was still on the board this late. He could still end up being in that defensive tackle rotation, kind of like Shy Tuttle was last year, and kind of fit in right around maybe take like a third string Taylor Stallworth's job. Someone who has a little bit more of a veteran presence, but doesn't really have too much along production. And then the other main positions that the Saints really kind of needed a little bit more of a need off of that they didn't draft. They got Marquez Callaway out of Tennessee. He could be a guy who becomes a third wide receiver if Traquan Smith doesn't show off even further, because this is kind of make or break season. And they've been known to be able to get at least one undrafted guy on the offensive side of the ball as a playmaker to make the roster and have some sort of significant impact on what Breeze is able to go to. Then going on to back on the defensive side of the ball, we have Keith Washington Jr. out of West Virginia. Now, reading up on different boards, I've heard he has the potential to end up becoming a slot corner to potentially replace the Patrick Robinson or the P.J. Williams on the Saints roster and save them a good bit of money that they can end up leading to other places. So if you have basically your top three cornerbacks being Marcus Lattimore, Janoris Jenkins, and if Keith Washington can build himself up to be that third guy as a slot guy, sure, they'll still have other edge corners to be able to work out, but he's one that could end up making a roster and playing a significant impact of the snaps that their defense is on the field. Now back to the other two draft picks that we got on draft day, both on day 2, Zach Bond and Adam Troutman. Starting off with Bond, he does fill a need that that was really the top Saints need in this entire draft, for the fact that he can play any linebacker position, to where he could be a Sam linebacker, he could be a Will linebacker, or he could be a Mike linebacker. If he was a Will linebacker, he would be right behind Demario Davis, even though Davis is the only consistent linebacker on the roster that's been able to stay healthy for the past couple of seasons. But he could end up battling for spots between like Kiko Alonso and Alex Anzalone for starting spots, or both of them could end up going. Both of them could be trying to fight for a starting spot at the Mike. Now, I do think Bond will likely be at the Sam linebacker towards the beginning to mid part of the season, because the Sam linebacker is set up to where he can be very versatile in a team's defense, to where he can play man, he can play zone, he can back up in zone coverage, and he can be used as an edge pass rusher, which he's shown the potential to do that through his entire time at Wisconsin, but whenever he wasn't injured, which does give a little bit of concern for the fact that Anzalone and Alonso had some of that same issues in college and in pros. But then we go to Troutman, who is essentially a Jared Cook clone in a way, but is kind of a bigger wide receiver as well. He is currently the number 3 tight end behind Jared Cook and Josh Hill. As I said, Cook and Troutman are kind of the same build, kind of the same skill set. So it could make it to where Jared Cook could be a cap casualty, even though he started to build off more consistent production towards the latter part of the season last year. But if they need to if they want to get someone younger, as Cook is going towards the latter part of his prime, and even though he had one of his best seasons last year, over the past 2 seasons, with his last year at the Raiders and this first year with the Saints, we could use Adam Troutman to be a a cheaper replacement to end up filling the void of what Cook would end up leaving. But that's the end. That is a brief snapshot of what the Saints might be doing after the draft at this point. You've already seen the signings of a couple quarterbacks with Winston, Hill. You might see either a trade or a cut of Larry Warford, and potentially if they want to make more room, they could make Cook a cap casualty and save $9 million on their roster to potentially end up trying to go after another linebacker potentially, or even another wide receiver, another veteran wide receiver. But that's all for this. Thank y'all for watching. If y'all enjoyed this, please like, subscribe, share it out to other people. Please hit that bell down below to where you can end up seeing anytime I make any other videos on this. At this point, it's going to be a lot of things that are going to be either college football or NFL related, just for the fact as there is some sort of content that we can go off of. But once we get more information on like the NBA, college basketball, college baseball, and MLB, or anything among any of the other sports you might be interested in, just let me know in the description down below. Please leave your comments, any suggestions for anything else. With that all being said, I'm the Contained Kunas. This is Stat 7 Sports. Y'all stay safe and see y'all next time.